we have the moderator of the session with us. We have Hannington. Hi, Hannington. Okay. The first speaker that we have with us is Adla Kharik. Adla is a young scientist and nature advocate working in biodiversity conservation. She is an assistant to NFB, UNCBD, and IPBES in Bosnia and Herzegovina. With strong knowledge in science and policy, she is the author and co-author of more than 50 publications, and she has been involved in more than 30 international and national projects related to biodiversity protection and conservation. Thank you so much for joining us, Adla. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. Double the screen. Thanks everyone for the patience due to technical issue to access to this, but I believe we will learn a lot and change a lot of things together. So as you know, the today topic is about biodiversity on land and underwater, which is mainly based on major policy developments. And I will cover this thing about the underwater biodiversity. So the oceans alone cover about 70% of the Earth's surface. Marine biodiversity, the variety of life in the ocean and seas, is a critical aspect of all three pillars of sustainable development, as we know, is economic, social, and environmental, and supporting the healthy and functioning of the planet, providing services that underpin the health, well-being, and prosperity of humanity. The ocean is one of the main repositories of the world biodiversity, and it constitutes over 90% of the world's biodiversity. And it contains around 2,050 known species, with many more remaining to be discovered. So at least 2/3 of the world's marine species are still unidentified. The oceans and the life therein are critical to the health functioning of the planet, supplying half of the oxygen we breathe and absorbing additionally about 26% of the anthropogenic carbon dioxide emitted in the atmosphere. So when we go far and we ask why marine ecosystems are important, now we can see that evidence that continues to emerge demonstrating the essential role of the marine biodiversity is underpinning a healthy planet and social well-being. So there are so much benefits to human and marine ecosystem provide a range of various services that are fundamental for human well-being, health, and livelihoods. A fishery and aquaculture sector are a source of income for hundreds of millions of people, especially in low-income families, and contribute directly and indirectly to their food security. Marine ecosystems also provide services for coastal communities around the world. So, for example, if you look at the mangroves ecosystem, they are an important source of food for more than 210 million people, but they are also deliver a range of other services, such as livelihoods, clean water, forest products, and protection against erosion and extreme weather. And we all know that there are so many threats on this marine ecosystem. And we look what is the main threats. We can see that there are direct exploitation of organisms, which means mostly overfishing, ecosystem loss, climate change, pollution, and invasive species. So in the ocean, when we talk about overfishing, the overexploitation of fish, shellfish, and other organisms has the largest relative impact of biodiversity. And over the last 50 years, fishing has expanded at all scales. So fishing boats are bigger, they go farther, deeper for a longer time with increasing technical degree. So when we ask ourselves, do we fish in more fish, or we reached a peak of productivity, let's say? So that is a really great point that should be discussed. The amount of bycatch species is also tremendous, with the global estimate is around 40% of total marine catches being unwanted species, and after release that in the water of illegally sold. With all this, it seems obviously that the unsustainable exploitation of marine organisms is directly causing the biggest impact on life in the ocean. When we talk about a habitat loss, changes in the uses of the sea and coastal land has a strong impact on marine ecosystem and causing ecosystem to degrade or disappear. Urban development of the coastline, destructive fishing methods, construction of aquaculture facilities, and pollution from rivers are physically and chemically impacted marine and coastline ecosystem. Mangrove forests, coral reefs, seagrass meadows, and other reefs found globally and hosting the majority of marine life. So when anthropogenic pressure are causing the destruction and loss of this ecosystem, the entire living world found within them is lost alongside. Definitely one of the important topics is about climate changes, and climate changes are one of the threats that strongly impact marine ecosystems. So for example, we have a coral reefs that are directly suffering from climate changes, and corals are highly sensitive to water temperature, and increasing of temperature makes the corals bleach, and in that way causing their death. So business as usual is not an option anymore, which is the reason why we need to act and why youth also needs to act. The global coverage of living coral has declinably halved since the 1950s, and up to 90% of corals may be gone in the next few decades. Also, we have a pollution that affects all ecosystems, but especially marine ecosystem. And when we talk about pollution, we have chemical and plastic pollution that mostly affect marine environment. And as well, we have invasive species. So the introduction of new species by human deliberately or accidentally is causing new forms of ecosystems to form often not really diverse nor resilient. So transported by floating debris across ocean or by attaching the cargo hulls or in the ballast water of ships, many organisms find their way from one part to the another part. The globalization of the world, accompanied by the development of global marine transport, is responsible for it. And one of the most common examples is the invasion of the lionfish, the fish that we can actually see on the left side, originally found in the Indo-Pacific. This species has been able to colonize all oceans. And now, for example, we in Mediterranean Sea can see it very often. It's a big issue. So what we need to change in order to improve everything? So we need to change the policy. And what kind of changes do we need? Definitely we need transformative change and include all communities. When we talk about transformative change, something that I really want to mention is ongoing assessment, transformative change assessment, IPAS, that is implemented by the IPAS, so Intergovernmental Science Policy, Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And currently I'm the fellow at the Transformative Change Assessment. So also if you have any questions, let me know. And this assessment actually will assess and compare different visions, scenarios, and pathways for sustainable world in line with the 2050 vision for biodiversity and consider the 2030 agenda for sustainable development and its sustainable development goals, including visions of indigenous people and local community. As we can see, here are 5 chapters and that are covering all those things that I already mentioned. So generally, why is this important? This is also important because youth can be engaged in this, and youth are necessary to achieve the transformative change. And in that way, if we go to the best part of the IFAS, since I'm the fellow, definitely, I will say that it's the IPAS fellowship program, and I would like also to suggest you to apply. So in IPAS, youth could be engaged through IPAS fellowship, but also as a contributing author or by providing with comments on the assessment that are under peer review processes. And I would like to share this with you. So how to become IPAS fellow. So right now you can apply to become a fellow in the IPAS fellowship program. There are two calls. The first one is on the task force scenarios and models. And another one is on the methodological assessments on monitoring biodiversity and nature contributions, actually the monitoring assessment. And the deadline is 19 December. So I hope some of you will consider this and apply it. So when we move further about a policy, definitely CBD is something that should be mentioned. So let's go to the Convention on Biological Diversity of United Nations. And yes, I want to share that I'm officially part of Bosnia delegation for UNCBD. And this is me actually in December during the COP. UNCBD couldn't Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, so something that is adopted in the center, a really ambitious framework that should be implemented by all countries that are member of UNCBD. And when we talk about this, Kunming Montreal Framework Biodiversity, so this is the package that actually include it. So we talk about a resource mobilization, capacity building and development, which means that it will cover technical and scientific cooperation, monitoring frameworks, which we have different indicators, and DSI, which means digital sequences information on genetic resources. But with there is also Sustainable Ocean Initiative that support UNCBD and promote a balance between sustainable use and conservation and the promotion of flexible and diverse approaches. Facilitate the provision of guidance and guidelines that will help achieve global goals and targets for biodiversity and identify best practice, create a partnership, and also do the technical and capacity building. So Sustainable Ocean Initiative help us to implement UNCBD in the way of marine biodiversity. And also UNCBD already established an informal advisory group on ecological and biological cyclical marine areas. And currently I'm the expert of the group. So when we talk about the oceans in this framework, ocean issues are spread throughout the framework, definitely. Nearly all aspects of the framework is relevant to the ocean, and it focuses on better addressing drivers on biodiversity loss and need for a broader engagement of ocean community, which means the different stakeholders. So now I will just mention the main targets. As I said, all of them are incorporated in this framework, but let's say what is the most important for the ocean in this framework is the target 1. So ensure that all areas are under participatory, integrated, and biodiversity inclusive spatial planning. Effective management processes addressing land and sea use change to bring the loss of areas of high biodiversity importance. Then we also have a target 3. That means that we need to ensure and enable that by 2030, at least 30% of inland water areas and marine and coastal areas, especially areas of particular importance for biodiversity and ecosystem functions and services, are effectively conserved and managed through ecologically responsive, well-connected, equitable governance systems of protected areas. If we move forward, we also have a target 5, which means to ensure that use, harvesting, and trade of wild species is sustainable, which is very important because in that way we prevent over-exploitation as well. Target 10 is to ensure that areas under aquaculture fisheries are managed sustainably, and particularly through the sustainable use of biodiversity. In target 18, we need to identify by 2025 and eliminate phase of or reform incentive, including subsidies harmful for biodiversity in proportional and just, fair, effective, and equitable way. Target 19, that is very important, substantially and progressively increase the level of financial resources, something that I also mentioned, like resource mobilization, that is a pack of Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. But what is very important, so youth need to act and need to be engaged. Youth is engaged in this process of UNCBD during the COP, but also in the working group as an expert. So there is also Global Youth Biodiversity Network that is engaged in UNCBD as a youth delegation. Then when we talk about the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, so the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea was adopted in 1982. It lays down a comprehensive regime of law and order in the world's ocean and seas, establishing rules governing all uses of the ocean and their resources. Why is this very important? Because currently on December 24 in 2070, the UN General Assembly adopted the consensus resolution 72/249 to convene an intergovernmental conference and undertake formal negotiation for a new international legally binding instrument under the UN Convention for Law of the Sea, and for the conservation and sustainable development of marine biological diversity in areas beyond the national jurisdiction. Which means we will talk about a High Seas Treaty. So the High Seas Treaty, also known as the Agreement on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, or if we saw the shortcut BBNJ, was formally adopted by the governments in June 2023, so this year, and in that time it should enter into the force after 60 ratification. In September, so it was signed, the process of signing was let us say more in December in New York in the margins of the United Nations High-Level Week. And currently, if we monitor the process, we can see that 83 countries ratified in order to protect our shared oceans, mitigate climate breakdown, and safeguard the lives and livelihoods of billions of people worldwide. So UN High Seas Treaty is actually based on that they need to make nearly 2/3 of the world's ocean. They represent 19.5% of Earth occupied habitat, but less than 1% of the high seas actually is protected, which is actually move on and forward to discuss and with a treaty to solve this issue and protect our ocean. And something that is also important to say, because we talk about the pollution and about the negative impact of the marine environment, is INC. What is INC? It's Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee on Plastic Pollution. In March 2022, at the resumed 50th session of the UN Environmental Assembly, a historical resolution was adopted to develop an international legally binding instrument on the plastic pollution, including the marine environment. So it addresses the full life cycle of plastic, including its production, design, and disposal. The INC began its work during the second half of 2022 with the ambition to complete the negotiation by the end of the 2024. So currently, they already finished with 2 seasons. The first season of the INC took place in Punta del Este in Uruguay from 28 November to 2nd December. And it's followed by the second season that happens this year in Paris. And currently, in next 2 days will happen the third season, which will take place in Nairobi. After that, they will have 2 more that will happen next year, and in next year they should actually finalize the treaty, and that treaty should be already implement to move forward and to, let's say, ratify and be accepted by all countries that they are in the process. So what you can do when we talk about a protection of marine ecosystem is that you need to be engaged in the policy. So everything starts from the policy, and that is very important, because changing the policy, we can change our future. So be active member of youth organization directly. So you need to be a member of Youngo, you need to be a member of GYBN, and in that way, we need to connect each other and trying to implement all best things in our country and bring those things in our country as well. Raise awareness about the biodiversity importance in your country, something that we need to do because all changes are happening in the local scale. We need to organize action. This is something how to someone show what we need to do and how we need to behave in order to protect our nature, and also apply for funds to implement your ideas in nature protection, something that we definitely need because it will allow us to do all scientific based things and policy. In order to improve policy, we need scientific based information. So for example, what I'm doing currently is like implementing the project of establishing the first marine protected areas in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is supported by the Rafa Conservation Foundation. So you can also apply for a Rafa Conservation Foundation and to support your activities. And very important things, and the last thing is that we never need to give up. And what I want to say, so thank you for all, this is just a few of them, but thanks everyone who is actually doing great work like UNCBD, UNFCCC, UN Ocean Conference and much more, doing for the ocean in order to protect it and to gather us and to gather all countries in order to protect our oceans. Yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Adla. We had a lot of people asking on the chat how exactly to join IPES, and they wanted to connect more with you. So I really, really thank you for your insights and again for your message too. And I urge everyone to again put your questions on the chat. We'll also have the Q&A session at the very end. The next speaker would be Dr. Sanjay Mulur. Are you there? Okay. Okay.
Hi.
Yeah. So Dr. Sanjay Mulur is a conservationist, biologist, and wildlife conservationist with nearly 3 decades of experience in India and South Asia. He's involved in research and education outreach of various taxonomic groups and ecosystems, and also serves as part of the team that developed the IUCN Red List. Dr. Sanjay serves as the Executive Director of Zoo Outreach Organization Trust. I see you've already started sharing your screen. Sanjay, please take it away. Thank you.
Just give me a second. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, and is the screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Cool. Okay, great. Good evening from India. It's nice to be here, see all of you here. And my apologies for not joining in earlier because of some technical error. Just sort of got it sorted right now. Hopefully, everybody can see this and hear me clearly. And I'll just see what I can say in terms of this entire program, the agenda. Adla just talked about the global level and perhaps talking about policy and legislation on the marine biome. What I'm going to talk is more focused to India, and it's not going to be a very long talk. It's going to be a very short one that will sort of emphasize more on what's happening in India with respect to the policies, the things that have been going on. And just for those of you who don't know what's happening in India, perhaps this will be just a very summarized introduction to it. We've got a vertebrate diversity of many species that are still being discovered. We have several invertebrates also in India that are undergoing a rapid descriptive phase still. in terms of what is not known and what is being described. I wouldn't want to read through all of this. You can read it by yourself. But I just want to sort of highlight the fact that these numbers were, when I first joined and started assessing the status, they were less than half about 20, 25 years back. And today, there's been a huge jump in each of these numbers. And thanks to the taxonomic work that is happening in India, both at the revisionary stage and also in the new description phase, where a lot of people are showing interest now, which is a great sign, and especially the youth. And you see a lot of youngsters nowadays coming into conservation, and some of them are interested in taxonomy. Perhaps a lot more should be, and this is something that I would sort of encourage people who are interested in this all over the world, in fact, to take upon taxonomy as one of the foundation works in conservation, because we can't conserve what we don't know. And sometimes it's more difficult to conserve things that are just a statistic rather than something that is described formally. So I would say that, it would be a great contribution if you were to, apart from doing other things, work on taxonomy a little bit and perhaps encourage others to get into it. Plant diversity, again, there's a huge diversity found in India. I'm sure because, as you know, India has 4 biodiversity hotspots: the Western Ghats, Eastern Himalaya, Indo-Burma, and Sundaland. And the diversity amongst plants is also pretty high. Again, what we know is very little compared to what is actually out there. And as we speak, there are many more new species being described. But as we speak, there are also a lot of diversity is extremely highly threatened by the invasives all across the country. Just to give you a simple example, recently we did a survey just outside of the city that I'm based in, Coimbatore, in southern India, and just one wetland, flora, highly degraded wetland found just outside of a development zone. 130 species of plants, of which 40 of them were invasive species. And that is quite a huge proportion. And if you were to look at several other spaces within the Indian context, you find invasives literally taking over, dominating the landscapes. So this is something that we are extremely concerned about and need to work. Fortunately, there are some states that have now come up with tackling invasive species. And while the policy is still young and still being refined, there is at least a move and recognition in that space. And again, the youth can play a wonderful role here, and I encourage all of you to be part of it. And this is, while I say this is for India, I'm sure the invasive species and its impacts all over the world is very similar to what's happening in India. And I would encourage you to work in your own spaces, to concentrate, perhaps focus more on that. Fungal diversity, of course, there's a lot more happening in India that we are unaware of, but at least this many are described till now. When it comes to biodiversity laws in India, we have several of them, and I'm just highlighting some of the more important ones. Wildlife Protection Act, that was introduced in 1972, got amended just this year, early this year. The Forest Conservation Act, first introduced in 1980, again got amended just this year, and it's just being implemented as we speak. Environment Protection Act in 86, and then the Biological Diversity Act in 2002 are all important contributors to what we do in our country and how our entire protection and conservation, terrestrial and otherwise, is being influenced at the government level. The Biological Diversity Act, especially that was introduced about 2 decades back, has a lot to contribute, both in terms of biodiversity conservation itself. But having said that, the Biodiversity Act, apart from Section 38, talks very little about conservation of biodiversity. It's more about resource use and benefit sharing. So we need to bring it back more into how to conserve biological diversity. So we need a Wildlife Conservation Act, which is lacking in India. And again, as a youth group, I think you have a huge role to play here, and start influencing policymakers and governments and in various different sectors, including the education and outreach sector, which is extremely important. When it comes to the forest cover, we have about 25% of our country under forest cover. And this is what we know of in terms of what is out there. But as we speak, there is also a huge loss in forest cover. But if you look at this map, look at particularly grasslands, it's highly pocketed right now, and much of it is again either converted to agriculture or is for use for development. Because unfortunately, grassland ecosystem in our country, and I'm sure in certain other countries or in this region, grassland ecosystems are considered wastelands, and this is one major issue that we are facing. And a lot of our grassland species are threatened with extinction because of that, both plants and animals. So when you look at forest cover, it's the second highest forest cover loss in the world in the last 30 years. It's huge, and this is something that the government is trying to reverse, and a lot of organizations, both government and non-government, are trying to reverse, and with respect to restoration and everything else that is happening in the country. But the pace of reversal is not keeping up with the pace of loss. And while things are sort of projected to change by 2030, my only hope is that it happens much earlier. Positive changes take place much earlier. When it comes to grassland loss, again, in just over 20 years, we have more than 30% loss. And this is not just the loss that you cannot see on the map that I just showed you. It's a loss that is happening overall, be it the Western Ghats, Shola grasslands, or the grasslands in the plains, or even other kinds of grasslands that are very restricted to certain areas. Wetlands again have huge loss. In just over 3 decades, we've lost more than 40%, and this is a dangerous trend. Like I said, a lot of development, unscientific development, everything else is leading to all these different losses. However, we have some positive aspects where the government has introduced several different conservation or protection programs. This is species specific, but then, working on species, you also look at habitats, like Project Tiger, which is one of the first projects to be introduced in India in 1973, just celebrated 50 years this year. And a lot of the habitats also get protected under Project Tiger, and a lot more are being included within that context, which hopefully will bring in a lot more habitat into protection. Similarly, we have various different projects for different charismatic species. As you see that, all of these are well understood species, mega fauna, and so have gotten a lot more attention in the recent past. What we don't have is most of the non-charismatic species that are not actually conserved or protected. And this is, much of it is found outside of protected areas, which makes it that much more difficult to conserve or to protect. So it's very, very important that as youth, you take up some of these challenges and, perhaps drive some of these points home to the policymakers and the government to let them know that we have more than just these mega diverse species to conserve. Of course, while it's believed that, say, the Project Tiger habitats do protect habitats for other species, it's not always the case, because when you're looking at animal like a tiger, its mobility is much better than a species like a frog or a lizard or even a small mammal, where its mobility is highly compromised. Therefore, large areas that may be okay for a tiger to move along may not necessarily be okay for some of these less mobile creatures. And so we need to actually start looking at how much of the habitats that these different projects conserve or protect are actually worth the protection for other biodiversity. So this is some of the areas that perhaps as youth we can start looking at it and influencing people. So ways forward for the youth in India and perhaps all over the world is to start building evidence for conservation. This is extremely important. We have a lot of gray literature, a lot of notes and impressions out there from various studies, but very little is communicated. What is communicated is perhaps less than 10% of what is actually documented out there. We need to start building evidence for conservation, mainly through publications, through, not just word of mouth or through WhatsApp, social media, but actually through formal publications that can be used for conservation action, be it at the implementation level, be it at the policy level, or be it even in courts. When there are things that are put forward in terms of to encourage some conservation action, we need evidence. And that evidence, although observed and recorded, are not published. So as youth, I encourage all of you to start publishing more. Get into assessments. Species assessments, ecosystem assessments are one of the best things to understand anything that is happening around us. And this would actually help us get a better grip on what needs to be done, what we know, what is happening out there, and what needs to be done. Evaluation of projects that are currently ongoing is extremely important. Monitoring and evaluation. It's something that, from perception studies to everything else, we need to actually understand where we are going with this. Are we actually contributing positively, or do we need to go back to the drawing board to look at conservation action? There's nothing wrong in making a mistake, but everything's wrong in not correcting them. So it's always important to monitor and evaluate where we are going, and therefore start looking at how to inclusively start making conservation actions work. And to do so, you need inclusive conservation planning. And this is something that, again, on a very broad basis, a lot of the conservation planning happens only at the scientific level, or conservation planning happens at the conservation organization, be it government or non-government level. What we need to start doing is perhaps encouraging stakeholders, especially women's self-help groups and youth from various different communities, to come forward through outreach and education to help them understand what is the necessity, and then let them decide and help develop the conservation plans. This is an extremely important step that we need to all start working on. We have lots of acts in India, but the implementation is extremely poor. And this is where that, again, as youngsters, you can come about, start working with different stakeholder groups and organizations and individuals to start bringing home some of these wonderful acts we have into making them realistic and implemented. We also have certain important prioritization processes like the key biodiversity areas and Alliance for Zero Extinction that are happening around the world. And this is things that are doable, are smaller in scope, areas that are manageable but have highly threatened species and therefore highly threatened habitats. Maybe we can start looking at and identifying these important areas of priorities, species of priorities for conservation. And that's a good way to go. If you conserve species, you would have conserved habitats. And if you conserve habitat, you would have conserved species. And they work, mutually beneficial for each other. And of course, for all of us. And finally, we have restoration and rewilding that is happening around the world. And this is something that we need to start developing more rapidly, more actively, and very importantly, to also build from all of the above points, especially from evidence of what we know as native and what we know as invasives. And while restoration is happening in most places, information and knowledge about natives versus invasives is not that very clear. So perhaps some focus on that, going back again to what I said, taxonomy, and to understand the origins of species and to understand how habitats and species behave vis-a-vis each other. We need to start looking at that before we do inclusive, community-involved restoration. That's all I'd like to say at this point in time, and I hope you have some questions and some discussions to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for the amazing talk again and for inspiring everyone again to take more action and different ways in which we can get involved in. We will be jumping into the Q&A session next. I already identified a couple of questions, but again, reminding everyone who is present here, if you would like to ask your questions directly to the speakers present, please raise your hand so I can ask you to unmute and you can ask your questions directly. Yeah. We have Jin. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, I can mute it. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes,
seems
you're
like
audible.
okay, thanks so much. So thank you for the great presentations. I'm so honored to be here for listening and learning to some of the topic, especially related onto the biodiversities. I have two questions. One is as they mentioned about in the presentations it's IPBPS fellowships is that they mentioned about the some of the criteria. So I like to clarify. I'm also now into the national institutions, so it is possible for some of the persons who working on the national institutions or who has some qualify on got some master degrees or doctor degrees. They can did they set outside any qualifications for apply before apply onto the fellowships? That's the first question. And second question is, as here into the Biodiversity Academies, what kind of the point as the youth can make some capacity buildings for creating to the career path? As you know, that we got the fund. Some of the youth-led organization got the funding, and they take some actions. But as you know, these youth are going to be grown up in a decade, and they have to take a job. So that time, what kind of the point we can create for as a career path to keep them to contribute onto these kind of actions for conservation of the biodiversity or cleaning up to the oceans and taking some of the initiative in climate change? Those are two questions. Sorry for speaking too much.
Thank you, Jin. I see that the first question was specifically for Adla. Are you here? Yeah, okay.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jin, for the questions. So the first one, where we talk about an IPAS fellowship, what is important to know, the process of IPAS fellowship is always that you need to be nominated. So it depends, you have two types of nomination. You can be nominated by your government, or you can be nominated by the, let me say, organization. So that is the first, let's say, step in order to be engaged as an IPAS fellow. So when we talk about, let me say, career or criteria, it is important to know that IPAS fellow can be someone up to 35 years old. yes, you need to have a master degree. Also, if it's possible, PhD, but PhD is not necessary, which is very important to know. But to be, let's say, outstanding, so you know better. I mean, everyone for us knows where we are, what we knew, and what we achieved. And if you think that you already have so much thing in your biography that you can apply, then you can go on. But also, very important thing is that according to the rules of UN, they are always choosing someone with their also criteria. Let's say maybe they will look someone, let's say in a geography, more than someone who is now doing marine biology. So you never know for the preference for some assessment for they are looking for, and also they need to consider geography. So I mean, it cannot consist few people from same country, or let's say it should be include all regions and so on. Also the gender balance. So it's something that UN, according to the UN rules as well, they also need to consider all those things. If you have more questions about this, please let me know. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it would be advisable to share probably the link so that everybody can check it out and see what the other criteria are. If there's nothing more, I would ask Aman to unmute. Aman, are you able to ask your question? Okay.
Yeah, I'm able to ask. So basically, I just have a small question. Like most of us have already heard about Mason Life. This is a popular campaign that India is leading on mass level, and in this we are inspiring people to become pro-planet people by adopting lifestyle as per the nature. So lifestyle for the environment, that we are calling it life. So I want to know that what's your take on this, that whether adopting mission life will contribute to biodiversity or not. And also I have another question, that is what role we youth can play in ensuring the conservation of our rich biodiversity. So these are the two questions that I have. Thank you.
Sanjay, are you here? Dr. Sanjay?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very interesting to contemplate. But yes, having working communities, having species conservation drives and everything else leads to better life in general. And I think it's very important to start working with that scenario in mind. But the important thing is to actually go back and work with the communities to help them. If our education and outreach is of letting the communities understand what they've missed out in terms of what is available in, it's a very important first step. And so, based on that, you look at various different things as saying no to plastic, adopting healthy lifestyles, sustainability, and food resources, and reducing waste and everything else. So it's all part of looking at life more holistically and building it through behavioral change and by everything else that we can do. I hope I've answered your question to some extent.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I see Boniface Oyas. I'm asking you to unmute now. Are you able to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Youngo, the Youngo team, and our panelists for the in-depth presentation. I want to ask the question in line with the carbon credit of carbon market. Of recent, there is a upsurge in the approval of projects under carbon credit. Professor, I don't know whether this could be more harmful to the biodiversity or could be more pro-biodiversity. I don't know. What do you think? Carbon credit or carbon market? Can it harm more the environment or can offer more protection to biodiversity? Thank you.
Do you like me to answer, or Adla is answering this, or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's a carbon credits is a wonderful thing, but it also has to be used in a way that it's not a double-edged sword. So it's what's important is for everyone to understand how this is done, how ethically it's done, how inclusively it's done, how democratically it's done, and whether it's done keeping ecology in mind, not just nature but ecology in mind. We need to understand all these different subtleties before we start working on any aspect of carbon credits. What I would encourage everyone to do is to understand a bit more of the local situation before this is suggested as a solution, because we don't want greenwashing, which is one of the most dangerous things. If you help companies to greenwash, then the biodiversity loses out. If you're actually using carbon credits as a form of helping conservation, helping species, then we need to actually understand the holistic way of implementing those and whether it's also implementable in any given situation or not. For example, if there's any suggestion out there to say, to plant more trees in an area that has historically never had trees, would be a very wrong idea to do. Okay, it's ecologically more harmful, thereby causing more destruction to the environment and also loss of species, the grassland species. So you need to actually look at these things more holistically before carbon credits can be taken up as a solution.
Thank you so much for taking up that question. And I also would like to remind people that next Saturday, we actually have a session dedicated to carbon credits and other nature-based solutions. So please do attend if you really want to know more. I also see a question by Tapiwa Chimbatwa. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. But they wanted to ask about how can we promote sustainable utilization and benefit sharing, given a rise in big companies that benefit from local communities, especially in the marine space, and how can policies be a good reference point for different biodiversity spaces? I would request any of the speakers, if they want to take up the question, relates to corporates and the biodiversity space.
I would like to repeat a question. So how they can make changes in policy through youth action? It was something.
They said, how can policies be a good reference point? And the question was about how the rise of these companies are benefiting more and more than the local communities themselves, and how can we make changes, and how can policies be a good reference point for this?
Okay, thank you. So yeah, this is actually one of the biggest challenges when we talk about sustainability. So because companies have their interest as well, and like they are focused more on economy, let's say, but what we need to do is to have a strong policy and have a local community that can lead, and let's say that their areas and nature depends on them. So in that way, it's very important to strengthen the capacity building relations and to do, let's say, things like meet what we are actually doing. So we are organizing different meetings, different actions, and so on, in order to connect between each other, because all of them have their own interest, but it's very important to understand nature. So raising awareness in that and education, very important thing. In that way, it's something that is necessary, and it's also important to know that even in an education, if some area is not well developed or there are so much gaps, like in Bosnia and Herzegovina, then we need to know that it needs to pass like one generation. We needed the time. It's not something that it's so transformative to change someone's mindset, but not to give up. I'm always saying that, but to working on that, and after a few years, let's say step by step, we will definitely need improvement. And that's what we are doing, because otherwise changing the mindset for someone just so quick, it's almost impossible thing, especially in the countries that are developing or with economy in transition as well.
Thank you so much, Adla, for taking this up. We probably have space for one more question. I see Juliet Rogers wanted to ask what scientific research and technological innovations have been instrumental in advancing the goals of conservation and protection. Would any of you also like to take this up?
Can I just ask you to repeat the question, please?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So they asked what scientific research and technological innovations have been instrumental in advancing the goals of conservation and protection.
There are quite a few, especially in the sphere of conservation research. Everything from drones to molecular techniques have helped in understanding more about species distribution and presence, absence, and camera traps, for example. And then you have for taxonomic work, phylogenetic studies. A lot of different new technologies and techniques have helped in understanding better of what we know of the distribution of species and their status. From the point of view of conservation action, I think it's some of these things like drones do help in monitoring, in understanding, in evaluating what's happening on the ground, especially with respect to restoration, with respect to other activities on the ground, with Google Earth helping us understand how things are changing, either for positive or negative. So there are a lot of these new technologies that have helped us know better and do better in the sphere of conservation. Having said that, there are also some technologies that are used recklessly, especially what is known popularly as ecological engineering, where the ecology part of it is completely ignored, but the engineering aspect is shown as something that will help conserve, be it species or be it the environment, have been problematic areas. So again, as youth, I would recommend that everybody understand ecology first before you actually implement any technology to conserve.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanjay and Adla, again for the call. I see more questions popping in, but I would request that we send them to you by email, and the answers would be sent again. However, Tapiwa, if you have something really urgent, I'll ask you to unmute and ask.
All right. Thank you very much. So my question was with regards to marine conservation, and I wanted to ask Prof, since research is one of the major key pillars, and I've heard people talking much about technology, but we have a huge pool of indigenous knowledge systems. So I wanted to know how then can we leverage indigenous knowledge systems in informing research and conservation within the marine space, because especially here for us in Africa, we lag behind in terms of technology, but we have a very, very rich pool of indigenous knowledges. So how then that can be leveraged in terms of informing research and conservation?
Thanks for question. So just to repeat it, so it's not about the ocean technology, but like alternative, how to conserve it. Am I right? I mean, ocean technology now, it's something that it's really improved in the world as well, using different tools. Even like for a sea level rise, to measure it and to avoid, let's say, the effect of sea level rise. Or for example, if we have a strong impact of the sea on the erosion for the coastline, they are also trying to find some way, but this is not like a technological, but putting the stones in that way in order to avoid, let's say, erosion of that part, and then in that way to save the coastline part. So depend on the case. What is very important in that is that there are so much good case studies and good practice in the world, that there are summaries in different reports, and we can always find some ways, like currently the nature-based solutions, even if it's new, let's say like that, we can find already good practice in nature-based solution that it's, let's say, some of them are expensive, some of them are affordable, let's say like that, but definitely it is easier to implement than to use some high tech in order to save some species. But yeah, it's something that we can find also. I'm always saying what I'm doing, so finding all the different case studies and finding the different good practice that can we implement in the same case in our country. But the thing is also that youth should be engaged, and very important to be engaged in the organizations, because organization can do much more when you are working together.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the session. I would like to thank everyone for joining in, and if you're able to switch your camera on, we would like to take a small picture. So I request you to switch your camera on if you're able to. We'll take a picture, and I think that's the end of the call. Thank you all for tuning in and for staying for the long sessions and for asking your engaging questions. Okay, I'll start taking the pictures. 3, 2, 1. Okay, another one. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Our next session would be next Saturday, and I would email and WhatsApp you about the same. See you again, and thank you again, Adla and Dr. Sanjay, for joining in. Bye-bye, good day, good night. See you all again.
Thank you.